Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Motsoaledi, has signed off and gazetted amendments to the immigration regulations for those in the country using remote working visas. So under the new regulations, applicants must earn an income of no less than R1 million per annum. What else are under the new regulations? Let's unpack it with Chloë Loubser. She's knowledge and learning lawyer at Bowman Gilfillian. Chloë, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on to the program. And perhaps we can start here. Our digital nomad visa, is it part of generally sort of a global trend that we are seeing?
Hi, Michelle, and yeah, thanks for having me. So yes, this is a trend that we're seeing when it comes to global mobility, and effectively what these visas allow are for employees to remain in a country that they may have wanted to go on holiday, for example, and to actually stay in that country for a longer period than they would have been entitled to on an ordinary visitor's visa, and to then perform their work remotely while they're in that country for their foreign employers. And many governments worldwide, including ours, have been looking to take advantage of the number of persons who are working remotely and to attract these remote workers to their countries as a means of boosting their economies. And there are already more than 60 countries in the world that offer these kinds of visas, and South Africa has now just been added to that list.
So, Chloë, you know, we're always talking about the skills shortage that we're suffering from in various industries in South Africa. Do you reckon this kind of visa will help with that in some way?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that this is not really to address the skills shortage in South Africa, because what it envisages is that the employees will continue rendering their services for their foreign employers. It's not that they're going to come here and address our skills shortage. But what it may do is actually boost our tourism industry, our hospitality industry, for example, and thus create jobs indirectly because of the money they're bringing in and spending in the country.
Yeah, that makes sense. And hopefully they stay for longer, right? And it doesn't just end with the nomad visa. I want to ask you, Chloë, what has been the change to the legislation? Because I know that there was one draft that was released in February, but that appeared to be identical to a previous draft or something like that. Do you think that the amendments and the suggestions and the public consultations were taken into consideration?
Yeah, so it doesn't look like any consultations were taken into account with the original publication. So a draft, as you said, was published in February this year. The public were then afforded until the 29th of March to submit written submissions on the draft regulations. But the minister actually went ahead a day before that deadline and published the final draft in exactly the same version. So it was quite clear that public comment was not taken into account. Following some backlash, particularly from NEDLAC, the minister then admitted that he was ill-advised to publish those regulations prematurely, and he then withdrew them 2 weeks later. So what this recent development has been is that the minister has now republished the regulations, and there are some tweaks that have been made. And when we're talking particularly about this digital nomad visa, there are 3 material changes that have been made. Unfortunately, the drafting is a little bit poor, so it's not really clear what is intended by these changes. But the first one relates to the extent of the activities covered by the visa. So in the original draft, it was clear that the visa was available in respect of work conducted for a foreign employer on a remote basis. And what the tweak now is to add the words "or derives foreign source income." And it's not really clear what this means, but what it appears to envisage is that this also now caters for individuals who might be entrepreneurs or consultants who don't necessarily have a foreign employer, but who perform services and are paid by foreign clients. The term source is a little bit confusing, though, because that has a particular meaning from a tax perspective, and it refers to the originating cause of the income. So here, if the originating cause, which is the rendering of the services, is situated in South Africa, from a tax perspective, the income is actually a local source. even if payment might come from a foreign client.
Right.
So this results in a bit of uncertainty. And there is also the tax compliance exemption that has been tightened. So in the original draft, it said that the remote worker can be exempted from tax if they remain in the country for less than 6 months in a 12-month period. That has been changed to less than 6 months in a 36-month period. And the tax exemption is no longer automatic. They have to apply to SARS for that exemption.
Yeah.
Then the final tweak that's now appearing in the final version is this additional requirement when it comes to obtaining the visa, which says that if applicable, there must be compliance with legislation governing employment of workers in South Africa. Now, this is also quite poorly drafted, and it seems to say that it's the digital nomad who must comply with the employment legislation. It also doesn't say what employment legislation is contemplated. But this doesn't really make sense. So what it seems like it may be trying to cater for is making sure that digital nomads who work in South Africa are subject to terms and conditions of employment that are no less favorable than if they had been South African workers and covered by the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So, for example, that they're getting decent leave entitlements while they are working in South Africa.
Right. It sounds like, just because there are so many really important things that are so unclear still at this stage, Chloe, that foreign employers might be reluctant for their employees to come to South Africa on this kind of visa.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that is our concern, not just from an employment perspective, but from a tax perspective. I touched on that there are some individual tax implications, but also from an employer's tax perspective, there are some risks that if you have foreign employees working in South Africa for you as a foreign employer, that then creates the risk of a permanent establishment or a corporate tax presence in the country, which would then require the foreign employer to actually register as a taxpayer and as an employer with SARS. And this, I think, is the key concern that foreign employers are going to have when they're considering an employee's request to now work remotely from the country. And if this tax issue in particular isn't addressed, it's probably going to result in reluctance on the part of foreign employers to actually allow their employees to take up this visa opportunity.
Yeah, and hopefully this isn't a missed opportunity. Hopefully we can get these loopholes sorted out. Chloë, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. Chloë Loubser is a knowledge and learning lawyer at Bowmans.